Hello, and welcome to our ongoing series of chats just to talk about things that are really important and relevant for our community. Today we have Rose Juhasz online with us. Rose is from Michigan, and I'm going to ask you, Rose, to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Pat, and thanks for having me here today. My name's Rose Juhasz. I am a mom to a 15-year-old boy with Duchenne Holden, who was diagnosed just about 8 years ago. And in that amount of time, I've partnered with PPMD to be on the scientific advisory committee, and then recently had also helped with updating some of the draft guidance to the FDA to help pharmaceutical sponsors in their journeys to develop drug trials and that. And then professionally, I also happen to work in the clinical research area. I'm a director of an oncology research program in one of the country's largest Catholic health systems. So I've gained a lot of exposure and experience in that area of having patients enroll in trials and work with pharmaceutical sponsors in the process to engage patients in clinical trials journeys. So that's a bit about me overall. I'm happy to help in this initiative. Yeah.
So Rose, tell me a little bit more about your work. Are you in recruiting? It's in oncology, so obviously different from Duchenne, but are there threads that are very common that you learn in your work that you've been able to sort of look at and understand better in Duchenne?
So my scope and point of view really in clinical trials programs has been as a patient advocate and really looking closely at patient journey first and foremost. I'm not trained as a clinician, but I have a doctorate. I have scientific training in research, and then previously I had worked for 4 years in a health system quality department, specifically focused on patient experience in healthcare. So I've sort of had my feet in both arenas of patient experience in routine healthcare, monitoring the quality, monitoring safety, and then also this arm of working in the clinical research end, which is where, as a parent, is really hit at home for clinical trials, because my own son was also enrolled in a trial for a full four years in an exon skipping trial. So it's sort of been these three areas of my expertise personally, and then professionally that's come together. But yeah, we in the landscape of trials in cancer compared to Duchenne is quite different, because there's so many choices, there's so many options. There's already a well-established standard of care in cancer, and everything at this point for most cancers is just really improving, above and beyond what you already have. For Duchenne, we're really at the infancy and the starting points, but there are a lot of major things to learn about and commonalities about the process of how patients can go about and find trials, how we monitor the process to make sure that they're overseen with the high standard of rigor and safety and quality. And then again, I said, from my viewpoint, I aim to give the patients in our centers a good patient experience, the best that they can have coming in to understand the process of being selected for a trial and what's involved, and how we inform and consent patients in a way, and how the doctors and the nurses and clinical teams work together to navigate the process at a difficult point in someone's life. So I would say, I have mostly interest in keeping our operations really patient focused.
Well, thank you for that. I think that the decision to participate in clinical trial is a big one. And I think much like many other experiences in life, you sign on to that clinical trial and then hadn't really thought about the enormity of the burden and all that's, intellectually you read the conformed consent and you understand the protocol, but then when it actually occurs and you're in that process, it really is an enormous commitment to participate in a trial. So we were really thankful to have you participate in the development of guidance. We developed guidance, as you know, in 2016, and then felt the need to update the guidance. And so this turned out to be a pretty heavy lift. And at the end of the day, the document's 100 and some pages with 20 pages of references. So can you tell me a little bit of why you decided to help, which we were very grateful for, but why you felt, or do you feel that this has been useful, important, and for patients and families worth reading?
Yeah, I stepped in and was very willing and felt honored to be selected to help participate in updating the guidance. And what I was focusing on was co-chairing the section that was about really the science of patient experience and patient engagement. And those are the aspects of how the pharmaceutical companies really need to understand the processes and the rigor of finding out from patients directly what matters to them in terms of when you have Duchenne. How are you impacted? What are the the key parts of that disease that are most meaningful, and really understand from the patient's eyes and hear their experiences and use that information to appropriately design trials that are fit and are going to meet the needs and lead to meaningful outcomes for patients. So I, again, having the experience of having a child in a trial, understanding the scientific design issues, having worked with industry partners before, and then knowing the tools and tactics that you use to engage with the patient community, either through survey work or focus groups or interviews. So we've kind of had to bring to the table all those different pieces of knowledge to guide the industry readers of this document, and also the FDA on what we as a Duchenne community endorse as the best practice for a sponsor to engage with our patient community. So without our guidance, you can imagine they don't have a lot of knowledge of what it's like to live with this disease. I think they would really struggle to understand the unique problems of patients and families with this disease. It's very complicated, as we know. It's impacts so many disease or systems of the body. There's a lot of complex things to piece together to really understand the patient perspective here. So I think it's essential for diseases like Duchenne to do this, to really advocate for patient voice, to be factored in and really at the forefront of what the pharmaceutical sponsors and FDA do. Because we're the customers, and at the end of the day, what we feel and what our children get out of this is the primary thing that they should be focused on. So yeah, it's essential way for our community to engage with the FDA and then the sponsors who would read this guidance. I would encourage anybody that wants to learn more about how the whole document was put together to go to the links that PPMD makes available, check out what the different sections are, and just kind of browse around in there and take a look at what most interest you. And I think our chapter on looking at the patient voice and patient experience is one that's probably the most reader friendly, or patient centric, because it's about us. It shares a lot of prior findings that PPMD had done with other research groups previously to share what's been learned in rigorous studies already about what patient communities in Duchenne feel about risks or benefit of trials, or what aspects and components of disease course are most impactful on quality of life types of issues. So it's a really nice chapter that summarizes the key issues related to patient experience and patient voice. Beyond that, it's very rich and a great learning opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into understanding the latest clinical advances and things related to the disease course. There's a lot of exciting updates that have happened there, and the rest of the chapters were developed with a great set of clinical partners and another folks from pharmaceutical industries really coming together to lend their expertise and tell the story about Duchenne from multiple perspectives. So there's some different chapters related to cardiac care in Duchenne, other chapters related specifically to measuring like the patient-reported outcomes in trials. So it was a really thorough and well thought out document that I would encourage anybody to at least start looking through it and pick the parts and look at the summary sections. There was ways to make it readable and accessible to non-scientist people. So I hope it would be accessible and something other parents would find useful to look at.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think it was it certainly was a heavy lift for all of the people that are doing that, who participated in the guidance, and certainly Teo Smart, who was the writer of the guidance, had to pull a lot of things together. And I think this year, because we added gene therapy as well as cardiac to this, shows an evolving of the community and increased knowledge as well as increased complexity, if you will. But I think that patient preference, and I agree with you that the chapter is so readable and so important, because it really does matter for patients participating in trials that the trial is reasonable, less burdensome, but also that they understand this benefit risk analysis. How much are they assuming, or what assumptions does anyone make entering a trial for themselves, that they hope for a different outcome, they expect a different outcome, or what they're thinking. And so it really does look at how much risk are you willing to take for how much benefit are you anticipating. And I think, so often, at least in my experience with Duchenne, I think there's an assumption sometimes that patients and families want magic, like all of a sudden you're not in Duchenne. And I think probably down deep in our hearts, that's something we would like. But I think we are also a very well-informed group of people, that we can look at these trials and understand that it's probably going to be a combination of therapies at the end of the day. And these kinds of documents help us amass knowledge to go forward, to make sure that patients and families and clinicians and FDA understand what the patient needs and wants. You also mentioned 3 different ways that we assess knowledge, whether it's survey, whether it's a focus group, or whether it's interviews. In your experience, is there a preference, or do you find different bits of information at each of those opportunities? Do you see one better than the other in terms of trying to get a holistic view of benefit risk?
Yeah, so in terms of the 3 ways that are quite common to get the patient feedback, I would say I've been more partial to the survey work, because that's a way to reach kind of the largest component of people at once. And PPMD has shown really, really great skills in this through running a lot of the online surveys or collecting short survey questions from patients that are registered in their systems and in the registries. So that's probably one of the quickest ways to get good quantitative data from the most people at one time. Good methods where you can reach patients that are internationally located, right? You can catch people, worldwide with that type of method. If you're really looking to dive in for more qualitative and really get insights and a narrative from a patient, there, the focus groups and more detailed interviews are really good for that as well. So I think they all play their own important part in piecing together a patient voice, and it's nice to have the different opportunities for families to participate in. Some folks might be most comfortable and willing to do quicker surveys and really sit and think about their responses, and might be a little too shy to take on a full interview, or that might feel too intrusive or emotional for families. So it's always important to have those surveys there, and then the patients that do really want to share their stories and interact. I also would encourage them to take up the opportunities when they're asked to have interviews or sit in on the focus groups that industry, often is looking to recruit the patients, for that opportunity.
So when Holden was in the trials, in the Antisense trials, just thinking through joining those studies, how did you feel about those studies? Had you seen any of the preference studies? How did you think about that? And how did he think about that?
I don't know that I had looked very specifically to guide our own choices on the trials by looking at the guidance. We've kind of had enough of our own experience or knowledge and opinions already formed, or we were able to talk with doctors that really guided our decisions on which trials that would be good for him and which ones they considered probably again the safest. The most impactful thing that a physician told to me very early on after my son was diagnosed was about the exon skipping trials, how much preliminary work had already been done, and she had said, this is a safe, feeling that this is a safe type of technology. It's not going in just yet or changing, trying to do a genetic change. It's just, so that was a big thing for me to hear a physician say, I would trust this to be one of the safest options at this point. So that was the biggest factor, and it matched to his genetic mutation. We were lucky enough to have an option that was reasonably close to us. I mean, we did have to travel out of state, but we were able to get up to the Chicago site once a week for, probably close to 3 years. My husband or I had to take that weekly trip up to Chicago, and then it transitioned to in-home infusions for the duration of the remaining part of the trial. But yeah, he had screened for multiple types of exon skipping drugs. And one stage he had actually failed a screening because he performed too well. So that was also some of the first insights into watching Duchenne drug trials be designed, that, they were actually eliminating children in very early stages who were actually, again, too good to be on that trial, but yet these children are certainly impacted, and they're already suffering with a disease that's just going to get progressively worse. So I think the community's done a lot of pushback to industry to tell them, we really need to figure out your eligibility criteria here and either do different stratifications or pick different endpoints. You need to work with industry to pick different endpoints, because how can we be failing and not putting kids into trials at the earliest stage of the disease, where possibly you're most likely to prevent any further damage and to preserve what they do have. So that was really eye-opening to see that, where at around 8 or 9 years old, he wasn't eligible, but he then finally was able to go to a different trial, and then even in that, almost aged out. So we had this tiny little window, and just so luckily that could enroll him almost just a month before he turned 10 years old, to be again he would have aged out and been ineligible because of age. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges my family has personally seen in the trials journey, was just this odd, the odd scenario of not qualifying for being too good and then aging out possibly, and then you have families that once the boys are non-ambulatory, it felt like there's no options for them, and that's not right either. So I think it's been really good, the dialogue that's happened with drug companies over the last years to get more options for non-ambulatory patients, and really think a lot harder on what what the measurements and outcome points in trials can be to make sure you can include the really younger boys as well. And I think a lot of the next advancements are looking at pulling in imaging results, really looking at the quality of muscle and different biomarkers and things. So I think that's really where a lot of these trials need to go, start integrating those types of measures, because the physical function tests, that's just it's really hard at the age that these boys are at, right? They're too you really would want to get children in trials as young as you can, but you can't rely on a physical function test in a 2-year-old to a 4-year-old. And so that's what makes it really really challenging.
Yeah, I agree with you, Rose. I think that I can't even imagine being in a clinical setting and being screened and being said you're too good, you're too strong, knowing the progression of this disease. Nor can I imagine having a child. I just recently talked to a mom whose child was screened for a trial, and he, in terms of seconds, supine to standing, one of the outcome measures that's being used, he was 1 second over the limit. So they came and said 1 second changes your opportunity to participate. Nor when the study is 4 to 8 years old and your birthday is tomorrow, for instance, and you turn 9. Mm-hmm. So I do agree we need, and I think one again in the guidance it talks about these biomarkers that are imaging, that are other. And for me, unbiased, right? You're going to look at the quality of muscle and make a determination. But again, I would hope that there would be a future time when we had a master protocol that everyone was in and everyone was allowed, and we were doing subset analysis with FDA so that they could at least use the tools that they have, like accelerated approval, and get these drugs to the people who need them, and then really understand their benefit on an individual. I can't thank you enough for doing the guidance. I know we'll be calling on you in a couple of years to do another update of the guidance. And I hope Holden continues to do well. And I hope he's always too good, right? That's what we're hoping.
Yeah, he is still doing fairly well, definitely for his age. Yeah.
Good. Thank you again for joining us today. I so appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Good to see you, and good luck in all the next steps and everything else PPMD is doing. It's great work. We're all benefiting, and we appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Rose.